I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ethics around making software. And not only do I not have any slides, there's also no code, and it's not about JavaScript. So I'm afraid I'm gonna have to disappoint you a little bit. When I was practicing this took me between 20 and 40 minutes, so literally anything can happen. But I think it's really important to talk about ethics of our work. And it's not something that gets talked about a lot. And I think the reason for it is that a lot of people, especially who don't necessarily have a technical background, tend to think that, well, you know, computing is this kind of objective, almost scientific thing. And therefore, by extension, these qualities apply also to all technologies that are being made. And what's even worse, I think, is that this kind of thinking applies also to people who make technologies, so they're assumed often to be more logical, more free from human bias, and somehow magically not very human and not susceptible to emotions, which is, you know, bullshit. So I will tell you about some projects that I think really get my point across, that technologies embody and communicate the ideas of people who made them, and why I think it's important to think about these things consciously when you make technology, because these things really matter. So in 2010, while I was still studying at university, I went to speak to Margaret Bowden, who is a researcher in the fields of cognitive and computer science, psychology, artificial intelligence. And I went to speak to her about sort of ethics of developing human-like robot companions, mainly for applications in sort of providing medical care or education and so on. And as we were talking about it, she told me a story of St. George's Medical Hospital College in London, which is a medical school, which is very popular because it's a very good school, and therefore every year they get quite a lot of applicants. So the applicants go through kind of multi-stage application process. At first, they're kind of like rated on this sort of grades and like the classes they took and things like that. And on the basis of that, then people decide whether it's worth to invite such a potential student to an interview. And then, like, once they're invited to an interview, there's like some other stuff that happens that I'm not really sure about. But so they've decided that this first part of the process could be easily automated, and it's the part of the process that's really labor-intensive, and it takes a lot of staff time to kind of go through all the applications and decide who is worthy of interviewing. So in 1980s, St. George's Medical Hospital decided to develop a computer program that could deal with the initial stage of the application process. So they've devised a set of rules that were given statistical weighting, and these rules were to do with like what grades they got for which subject and so on. And then the students were sort of marked in order of preference, depending on how many points they scored, and then like there was a threshold established above which they would get invited to an interview. So what happened is that once they developed the system, they started to tweak the statistical weightings, applying to all the different options. And based on previous year's data sets, like on who applied and what kind of grades they had and so on, and who ended up getting invited, then they tweaked the program to basically exactly replicate the results they got in the previous years. So then, between 1982 and 1986, they used the program to help them in with their admission system. That carried on only until 1986, when two members of staff complained to Commission of Racial Equality that their admission system essentially was discriminating against people of color, and also that was given not enough prominence to women and people from poorer backgrounds. Now, the software itself was only performing very simple calculations, very simple computations that, you know, and also as not a human agent, software itself doesn't have any prejudices and biases. But because it was made by people who had themselves unexamined prejudices, they ended up creating it so that the software replicated it in a seemingly objective manner. Now, it would be very unfair of me to suggest that this was done deliberately, because at the time, St. George's Medical School was the most diverse college in entire England. And therefore, I think what happened there is that people who didn't necessarily think about their own biases ended up replicating them. I think it's also really interesting that in this case, this was only uncovered after the sort of human was removed from the process. So once software took over, it was okay for people to complain about its biases and bring them to light. But when it was your colleagues doing it, perhaps it was a little bit more difficult. So I think some projects end up sort of expressing values of people, even though people didn't necessarily build them into the projects. For example, Google Glass is the kind of technology where a lot of people bring to light the fact that they're kind of scared of the privacy implications of technology like that being widespread and potentially always connected and always recording. And they worry about who is in ownership of the data that is being captured, who stores it, who has access to it, and whether as a person featuring in this data you have any kind of access to it, or whether you even know that this data exists. But I think it's really important to think that the team that has designed it, although I don't actually know because I wasn't a part of it and I don't really know anybody at Google, but I assume that when it comes to designing products like that, first things that come to mind is, exploring the impossible, the desire to create something that hasn't been created before, the desire to bring computing to tasks that normally would require you to switch off and do something else and focus on a device. So instead, you kind of like start seamlessly integrating into your life. And the privacy implications don't necessarily feature on the list of priorities of a team that designs a product like that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just a fact that exists, that you have company cultures that have certain sets of priorities, and you have people working in teams that have certain sets of priorities, and these things end up being embedded in the products that these teams create. So sometimes I disagree with the priorities of people who make stuff, and these things make me very angry. And I sometimes wonder whether the decisions they make are by design, or whether they are aware of the implications of the things they do. So for example, there is a new sort of wave of businesses like TaskRabbit or Crowdsource or Crowdflower, which basically operate on the idea that as a business, you often have a lot of tasks that are fairly small or repetitive, or sometimes they're kind of unique and they're not going to repeat. So instead of employing people to perform certain tasks, it would be better if you could just get the stuff done and then get on with your work. So these businesses essentially allow you to commission specific tasks to be completed, and you only pay sort of per task or per time that it takes to complete it. And in a way, this enables certain businesses to exist or to get their work done. So it provides a booming economy for certain types of businesses. But it also means that you're completely bypassing employment laws. So you don't have to care about your workers' health. You don't have to care whether they're insured or whether they have any pension provision. You don't have to care whether they have a healthy workplace to be working from, or whether they get to do, whether they get to take breaks or eat sufficient amounts of food and so on. All you care about is the low price. So by building technologies that enable this kind of exchange, you are essentially potentially changing the sort of way of working for people in the future. Workers' rights aren't something that is just like an add-on that you can conveniently remove when it suits you. there's something that we have fought for many years to establish to make sure that there's actually a healthy and productive workforce. So in cases of businesses like that, I sometimes wonder, did people not think about the repercussions of creating these businesses? But on the other hand, they also mean that other types of businesses can get stuff done, and therefore they can exist. So it's like a double-edged sword. But there are projects that very clearly and very deliberately communicate the values of people who have created them and who work for them. One such example that I think is my favorite is Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia, when it was created, very deliberately it was created based on a set of principles. And these principles permeate everything that is to do with the project, from software to sort of community guidelines. So there are a few principles that Wikipedia was built upon, and in different sort of language communities, they slightly vary, and they're kind of written down slightly differently, and they're not very definitive, but they're kind of like very general ideas. And English language Wikipedia defines them as 5 pillars. And these are openness of the community, kindness and respect towards other people, and assertion of freedoms. And in a little bit more detail, they speak about them like so. First of all, they define that Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, and therefore it's not an advertising platform, it's not a directory of information, and it's not a collection of just random information. There has to be a purpose to everything they do. And this kind of idea helps Wikipedia maintain a good quality of content. Another idea is that it's written from neutral point of view. So your personal opinion is not welcome. You're supposed to characterize facts rather than interpret them. And together with the sort of first principle, these two things mean that quality of content on Wikipedia is generally held up to a very high standard. Then there's a freedom principle, which means that not only is the content free to access, you are also free to contribute. So you can freely modify it, you can adapt it, you can share it, you can edit it, and you can use it for any purpose you like. And this is like my favorite principle, because essentially it creates a sort of sharing that totally transcends all human differences. So no matter where you're from, no matter what is your background, you can contribute to this amazing project, and the only thing that matters is that you want to do something and you want to help out. And like one of the key sort of features of Wikipedia that stems from this principle is that to ensure that there are no barriers to entry, like you can edit anonymously, you can register under a nickname, or you can register under your full name. But to remove all the barriers, like you don't have to register at all. So you just you can edit it anonymously, which is really important. Penultimate pillar on which Wikipedia is built is following the Wikipedia etiquette, which is that personal attacks are not welcome. This is not the place to be arguing about stuff. This is not a place for personal attacks. This is a place where we uphold like the highest of social standards so that we can collaborate on something that's really important. And this is also important to the previous principle, the principle of freedom, because if you have a situation where you have to fight people on a personal level to contribute to the project, that means you can't contribute to the project. So this is removing another barrier to entry. And the last one is that there are no firm rules, and therefore you can make your own decisions, and you can take responsibility for the things you do in Wikipedia, and if they are wrong, then community will work it out and tell you, but essentially you're given the freedom to kind of own part of the project and make almost executive decisions. So from the very beginning, this set of values shapes like the feature set of the software that exists, but not only, it also shapes how the community guidelines are constructed and how the community around Wikipedia is run. And it's a success story in many ways. It's the largest one of the largest reference websites. And the amount of contribution it receives is absolutely enormous. And it's on the contributions are on a very broad range of subjects as well. Unlike printed encyclopedias, the longer the articles exist, the longer they're being talked about, the more consensus is achieved on a lot of issues, and the more people contribute. So you end up with articles that are very comprehensive and usually very factually accurate. So these ideals of like freedom and openness are the ones that I personally value very deeply. And this amazing idea that you can contribute whoever you are and your contributions only matter based on their own merit is super powerful. But when people talk about meritocracy, they imagine that simply by virtue of removing barriers to entry and allowing everybody to contribute in a good environment, then the contributions will accurately reflect society and will provide equal opportunities to contribute. But despite being called the sum of all human knowledge, Wikipedia is only the sum of knowledge of people who are already online and who have time and ability to contribute. Despite the best intentions, only 9% of contributors identify as female. And Wikipedia recognizes that this is something that needs a lot of work. Now, what's really cool about it is that they recognize that the problem is no longer technical because the barriers have been removed, but they recognize this is a social problem, and therefore they've devised social ways of dealing with it. So, for example, they appoint university ambassadors who sort of evangelize about Wikipedia and try to broaden the try to get contributions from a sort of broader demographic than already exists. But even that doesn't address the fact that only a third of the global population is online. So despite various attempts, until we fix infrastructure, we can't imagine that there's going to be equality of participation opportunity. Now, I've been trained as a designer. I studied design at university, not computer science. And as a designer, you kind of learn to think that when you're assessing whether a project is successful, you kind of have to remember that every single design is always being used in a specific context. So you have your object, whatever it might be, and it's used in a specific physical place by a specific person, and the person and this place are always under various influences, be it political, financial, cultural, environmental, technical. And these may or may not differ from the context under which you are creating the stuff. And a design that doesn't take these contexts into account and doesn't respond to them is essentially a failed design, because nothing can exist in a vacuum. Expecting something to exist in a perfect world is essentially just rejecting reality. So I've been thinking about this in relation to Wikipedia, and I wonder whether the lofty ideals baked right into it somehow make for a failed design, because it fails to sort of respond to a world in which not everybody can actually contribute. And freedom to share information isn't just dictated by your ability to make it so that everybody can edit it, but also by circumstances beyond potential contributors' control. But technology is a cultural product, and as such, not only does it reflect the culture that was created in, but actually actively shapes the culture of the future. So not only does it embody values of the people who made it, but also somehow expresses the values back into the world and kind of creates the world in which these values become pervasive. So it can be a transformative tool because it communicates something about what we want the world to be. Cliff, who proposed developing software engineering a code of ethics, said this: "Software is a form of expression and can contain both entertainment and commentary on society, politics, and economics. So to me, the more I think about it, the more Wikipedia seems this kind of a expressive, speculative project. It communicates the idea that we want to live in a world where everybody can contribute and we all see value in doing something together and doing something of great importance that we can then all share and use. But there are many projects that don't necessarily receive this kind of careful consideration when they're being created, like Wikipedia did. So when I spoke to Margaret Bowden, I asked her what she thought about why that was. And she said that, you know, many people making software are still very young, so they don't really think about consequences of their own actions. And perhaps, you know, they haven't yet experienced a lot of the world, so maybe they haven't been exposed to diversity or old age. You know, they have no way of kind of relating to their own life with these things because they just haven't had the chance to like experience so much of the world yet. And also, you know, they're dealing with machines, so they're often kind of excused for antisocial behavior and not being interested in other people because they would rather sit and program all day. Also, another interesting thing she said was that instead of being excited about the cultural and social problems we face, the actual real problems in the world that we could be solving, people often just get excited about the technical challenges as if they're kind of replacement for dealing with the actual problems that we should be solving as a society. Now, designers and civil engineers get taught ethics to prepare them for real-life work experience, and they get taught at university. But despite the incredible power of software engineering and how it affects the world and how it shapes it, like that isn't necessarily the case. Also, if it were the case, like a lot of us are entirely self-taught, so that wouldn't necessarily make a big difference. So I would like you to think about like everyday decisions you make when you're creating stuff, you know, and like some of these decisions might be absolutely huge and painful and legally risky, like Ladder Levison, who was building lava bits and hosting it for 10 years, an email system that Edward Snowden reportedly used, when faced with the potential of having to reveal some of his customers' data to National Security Agency, decided to shut down the whole system. Now, most of us aren't faced with ethical challenges of that magnitude, but even like small things we deal with every day can have like a massive impact on people's lives. For example, you know, every day I make decisions about like what kind of data do we collect about our customers, how is it stored, who has access to it, you know, do we collect more than necessary, who do we share it with, and so on. But it isn't just about storage and collection of data. For example, at my work, we build a lot of different digital products, and in every single one of them, we've got a people table in the database instead of a very usual users table, because we thought that it would make us talk about people differently, and it did. It's slightly less dehumanizing to think of people as individuals than it is as about a group of users. So I think my last point is that technology is made by people, and it's used by people, and therefore it's a social and cultural thing. You cannot somehow remove magically people from the equation, so you can't get technology that's somehow objective and doesn't express human values, and you can't design it and make it in a vacuum where you don't understand how people use it and what they want from it. And you are building tools of the future. You are building the things that are shaping how we are going to be thinking about the world in years to come. And the things that you make might enable people to, for example, communicate or to express themselves, to do all the things they might need to get on with their lives. Technology now mediates pretty much every sphere of our lives. It's in the banking system, it's in a healthcare provision, it enables law enforcement and justice system. It mediates our personal communications, whether it be personal or professional or intimate. And it's a part of our culture. It helps us create art. So essentially, technology is like one of those things that lets people enact their human rights. And if it sounds like it's a massive responsibility, that's because it is. So I would like you to basically take that responsibility. And like, our political leanings may vary, and you might disagree with me on a lot of points, but I think I would be successful if you just think about it and know what it is that you want the world to be, and you are prepared to take a stand and make decisions that you could be proud of, because making the world a better place, it is your job. Thank you.